Excited to start a new series, Heaven on Earth. The series actually focuses a lot more on the side that we don't think about on Christmas. It talks about the fact that Jesus came down, why he came down. Instead of just the manger scene, but why he chose to come that specific way. Because he could choose any way he came. There's no barrier that says, hey, you can't come this way. No, he could come any way he wanted. He could come as a man if he wanted to. He could come as a baby, any way he wanted. He could come to any family. He could come to any time. And we don't really think about these. I think sometimes there's a lot of stories. If you're like me, who grew up hearing a lot of these stories from the Bible, and hearing them and them being read to you and you reading them to other people and just kind of growing up with it, we kind of forget to look at the other parts of the stories. It's like, okay, let's really look at this. And if you ever heard people, they ask a question, people that didn't grow up in church, you're like, I never thought of that. I don't know. So that's kind of the focus of this series. I also think it's really funny the way that God works out timing. If some don't know, I'm a person that likes to plan ahead a little bit when it comes to my preaching schedule. I grew up in churches where they knew what they were preaching Saturday night before they got up there on Sunday, and that was the normal routine. And there's nothing wrong with that. For me, I always felt like working ahead. I think God can work ahead as much as he can work in the moment. God's not like, no, you can't plan it. It's a sin to plan. Because if it was, a lot of us would be in a lot of trouble. But when I was prepared this series, it was December of last year when I started putting this series together. And, we didn't know that what would be going on at that time. I didn't know that, it's December now, so Kristen, my wife, is due next month. So when I'm reading the story, I'm reading it kind of from a different idea, from a different lens. If some of you may or may not have heard, we kind of had a crazy week. Kristen was at work and was heading to the doctor's office and actually fell down some stairs at work. And fortunately, her and baby were 100% okay. Surprisingly, very, very fortunate. She's very blessed to have not been hurt more. But it makes for kind of a crazy week because you're just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's going to happen and all that stuff. And I kind of thought about how sometimes things happen unexpected, and I thought of this story where we'll be from today, which is already planned a year in advance, and some of those things, how it worked out, and then your day yesterday, and things are going crazy around us this week, and that's okay. That's part of life. And that's really the focus of it today that we'll be going through, is that not everything goes the way we plan or we hope or the way that we want things to go. But Jesus is still there with us. Even though that we struggle and we suffer and we have pain, Jesus chose to come in our suffering, in our pain, to be in a time and to walk among us and to live with us and continue living with us. Our core scripture that we'll be looking at today, we'll be starting, is Matthew 1, 18 through 25. And Matthew is one of my favorite books in the New Testament. I think I like all of them for different reasons. One of the reasons I like Matthew is because the way that he presents everything. Matthew was educated in the Old Testament, very educated. He was one of the more educated ones. He's also known as Levi when he is picked. Levi comes from being a Levite, which means that he is of the people that were supposed to be the priests and everything. So he would have gone through training, and basically he dropped out of training at one point because you have to memorize so much by certain ages. So he dropped out of the training because he wasn't able to continue on. And then somewhere along the way, he became below a sinner in the eyes of the Jews and became a tax collector. So that's who Matthew was. But I love Matthew because when he says something, he's like, this happens, but this is because of the prophet that said this in Isaiah, or they said this in Ezekiel. And he references back, and we'll see that even in the short 7 verses we'll read, where he references back to the prophet. And he does that throughout the book of Matthew, which I love because I like to see those things and where it connects, and you see where the Old Testament and the New Testament connect. Because I think sometimes, I know a lot of people think the Old Testament is no longer relevant, has no value, has nothing in it that we can learn from. We should only have the New Testament. When I believe that there's a lot of, this is New Testament, Old Testament. There's a lot of value on this side. There's a lot of lessons that were learned. I think sometimes the Old Testament reminds me of my first pastor. I learned a lot of lessons of things not to do. So it kind of reminds me of those times. Things that you don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and you learn from those moments. But then there's also some huge stories about God's blessing and God's grace. So they're both very important, and they both connect. And that's the power of Matthew. You can see where it connects, and it makes me kind of dig deeper. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start in verse 18. And it says, "This is how Jesus, the Messiah, was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph, but before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph, to whom she was engaged, was a righteous man and did not want to disgrace her publicly, so he decided to break the engagement quietly." Just a brief stop there at verse 19. Deuteronomy 2:22, I believe, says that if someone, basically if they're caught in adultery, if they're caught committing sin, if they found out, which her being pregnant, not sleeping with her husband because she wasn't married yet, would mean that she was in adultery, she should have been stoned according to Deuteronomy 2:22. During this time, they didn't necessarily practice that fully because they were under Roman rule, but what they would have done is they would have publicly disgraced her. We see that later on in another story, the woman who's caught in adultery and she's brought out in public. So what he should have done, according to the rules and laws, is brought her into basically the town square and disgraced her and called her, whatever they would have done, and she wouldn't have been able to be married, and it would have disgraced her whole family. But Joseph, being a righteous man, decided not to. This is before an angel came to him. This is before God came to him. Anyone spoke to him. He's got concerns. Because like I said, I've said this I don't know how many times, because I really think about it. If Kristen, before we got married, came to me and said, "I'm pregnant, it's Jesus, it's God's baby," I would be like, right. So Joseph was a righteous man. Because I think most guys, if their girlfriend, their fiance became pregnant, and they know it's they did it because they haven't had those relations, he's going to have concerns, putting it mildly. So Joseph, very righteous man. And then verse 20, "As he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. 'Joseph, son of David,' the angel said, 'do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her,'" "For the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus," or Yeshua, "for he will save his people from their sins." All of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. "Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. When Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded and took Mary as his wife. But he did not have sexual relations with her until her son was born, and Joseph named him Jesus. So, stopping there, every time I read that story and I think about it, and I think about it from a purely human standpoint, it just blows my mind. So first of all, he's thinking about it. And I don't know if you ever had this thing where something happens and you stay up and you're thinking about it and you're trying to sleep. And you're kind of tossing and turning and you wake up a few times and it's still on your mind and you try to go back to sleep. I think that's where he was. Because it says as he was thinking about it, it's the middle of the night, the angel comes from a dream, so he's kind of going in and out of sleep. And the angel tells him, "Don't be afraid. She's not lying to you, she's telling the truth, don't be afraid. That child was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and this is what you are to name him." Him naming him is actually important. I didn't realize this, but in their culture, the person who was supposed to name the kid was the father. So by him naming him, that's saying, that's accepting him as his child. And also when you name him, like most people now, like me and Kristen, when we have our son, we're supposed to be able to stand there the day he's born, like, this is his name. They didn't name him until after 8 days. So once they were circumcised, that's when they gave him his name, when it was a boy. When it's a girl, obviously not circumcised. It actually doesn't detail that time frame. But 8 days later is when they're supposed to name him, but the father's supposed to be the one to give him the name because of some meaning. There's usually a meaning behind it. So Yeshua, it's how it would be the Hebrew name Jesus, does mean God with us. Then of course Emmanuel, and so seeing the correlation there with those of how important the name is, but just where the name came from. So then I think it's even more important to realize that the Father named him publicly, but who named him privately first? God commanded, this is what his name should be. This is my son. This is your culture. This is my son. You need to name him this. So publicly, Joseph is accepting this is his responsibility to take care of this child because, as I'll find out next month or sooner, there's nothing more fragile than a child. If you don't hold their head the right way, it's not good. You can't drop them. It's not good. That's what happened to me. No, but the way you have to take care of them, the way that you have to maintain them, is totally different. If I were Jesus and I could pick any way I could come, I would not be like, I want to come back as something that has to be held, fed, changed, all that by somebody else. And most of us probably wouldn't either. It's like, I don't want to have to rely on anyone to take care of me. Because what if they don't do it properly? But again, he knows what's in our hearts. He knows what's in our minds. So he's able to work through that. So he's starting from this point, moving forward. But he knew Mary and he knew Joseph and said, this is the couple I want to be born from and born into. So as we look forward, as we keep moving forward, the birth of Jesus reminds us that he chose to come near us. He wasn't commanded, he wasn't forced to. None of us were like, Jesus, please come, and he shows up. He's not a genie in a bottle that we brought here. But the birth of Jesus reminds us that he chose to come near us in our hurts and struggles. One of the things that I think scholars often debate is why Jesus came when he did. He came, they believe that he was born in, I want to say it's 3 or 5 BC is when he was born. So somewhere in that time frame, it's really funny to think of it that way because we think it should be exact. He's born on this day. Okay, Jesus was born 2,018 years ago because we think of BC as before Christ. And AD is after death. That's the way I always remember it. That's not what it means, but that's what I always remembered it by. But when he was born, when he was here, during his time period, only 10% of the world's total ever population had lived by that point. In the last 2,018 years, 90% of the world's eternal population that's been here on earth at one point has lived since then. 90%. The Israelites, during their time period, were actually one of the largest nations, even though they kept getting destroyed because they were foolish people, if you read this kind of had a habit of, okay, we're great this generation, next generation they fall in the mud, and then they great this next generation, they kind of go back and forth. So I think that's one thing where we shouldn't be surprised in our culture when it changes generation to generation. It's a great generation, then it's, I don't know what these people are doing. Then there's another good generation, kind of goes back and forth. You can see that in our culture still. If you look at when great revivals happen, there's actually a generational change between them most of the time. Sometimes it's more than a generation, sometimes it's a few. But it's very, 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 very unlikely to see a great generational revival happen one generation after another. There's a gap. Part of it is that you don't need a revival if you're already revived. If you're alive, you don't need to put the paddles to me and try to get me to breathe. That's going to do the opposite. But we don't look at it that way. We usually think that, okay, it needs to be this and we need to move forward. Part of it with us is when Jesus came, only 10% of the world had lived, with only a few 100-year gap. That sounds a lot to us, but if you look at the total history of thousands of years, there's only a few 100-year gap where they killed people the way that they killed Jesus. That on the cross. I didn't realize this, but a cross was actually meant to be a T. You know how, we think of the unlucky number of 13, right? It's unlucky. Certain cultures, I believe it's Japanese culture, they want 8s in their number. That's good luck. Like if I worked in a phone company, they would call and be like, do you have a number with 8s in it? Well, let me look. They want as many 8s as possible. It's good luck. 8s are good luck in their culture. For them, for Romans, Greek, the letter T was a curse. And when Jesus was crucified on a cross, you ever notice the cross looks a lot like a T? It's on purpose. The T was a curse. It was meant to be, this is punishment. There's a few different versions of crucifixion even. There's some that were an X. There's some that were T's. There's some that were totally different. Some were just on trees. Some had arms up. Some had arms down. But the way that Jesus specifically was believed to be crucified, and the way that he's depicted as being crucified, is with the Greek curse with the letter T. So when we think of that, he came during the specific time to be crucified and killed in this very specific way, because it was talked about years, hundreds of years before. Because if I look at my Bible, Matthew is 400 years after the last book of the Old Testament. They typically call those the silent years, but they really weren't that silent. Because where in the Old Testament does it talk about Pharisees and Sadducees? Where does it talk about Roman rule? Where does it talk about a lot of the stuff that we see in the New Testament? There was so much change occurring during those years that it was changing traditions. During those 400 years, they decided that the only way Jesus was going to come, because they knew that a Messiah was coming, but they thought it was going to be a ruler, one to reign, one that would come through the clouds, and he would shine like the light, kind of how we think that his second coming will be and how it's described. That's what they wanted for the first coming. They wanted his army to come flying through the sky. They wanted him to just take over and just decimate everyone else. Because they didn't want to see people saved. They want to see all these other people destroyed. They didn't like other people. They liked themselves. That's it. Sometimes I think we're a lot like that too in America. We don't like anybody else. We just like ourselves. We don't want these people. We don't want those people. We just want us. And that's, you can see historically, that's never a good idea. But as we look at it, you look at how that came those 400 years, they decided that the only way he's coming back is if they're perfect. So you know what you do when you strive for perfection? You add more rules. You add more laws. And you know what happens when you add more rules and you add more laws? People are further away from perfect than they were in the first place. It makes sense on both sides. Because you're like, okay, you ever write a checklist? It's the same thing. I know I need to get all this stuff packed before I leave on vacation. Here's all my stuff. And I promise you, I will forget something every single time. It might even be on the list. I think one time me and Kristen left and it was like, hey, did you grab the string cheese? Yeah, I left it. I set it out, but it wasn't in the cooler. It was just cheese sitting on the counter for a week. That's always a good idea. You can miss stuff. But for them, they set out the rules, you set out the laws, and I found that no matter how perfect I try to be, I can never be perfect. And when you set out more rules and laws, you're further away from it than you planned to be in the first place. So instead of feeling like they were growing closer to God, they were going further away. So then what do? Instead of thinking, hey, we should back up, this isn't working, let's make more rules and more laws and try to be even closer. And then that's when they start arguing. And that's when, well, Jesus isn't going to, we're not going to be revived literally with our bodies like they believe, and they believe this. And that's why there's Pharisees and Sadducees, and we start seeing separation and the way they live and preaching on street corners and standing there and they have to cover themselves when they're fasting. In January, we're going to do the 21-day fast again like we did last year, or this year. We're going to do it again. I believe it's important for us to see, and I love doing it corporately, doing it together, and we'll be doing it with 102 other churches on our district, so it's not just us. I don't know if all 100 will do it, but there's probably at least another 50 or 60 people, several thousand people doing it at the same time. But when I fast, I'm not going to throw ash on my face. I'm not going to, weep and stand on corners and say, I'm fasting right now. So I'm not going to go to restaurants and be like, well, what would you like to eat? I'm fasting right now. I'm just here to smell the food. I'm not going to do that. That's what they would do. They wanted to bring attention to themselves for fasting. So all this happens before Jesus comes. And I think part of why he came when he came is he sees that his people are going further and further and further from him. They're literally living amongst other nations. And instead of saying, hey, let me tell you about the God that I serve, they're saying, this is our God and he's not yours. They're little toddlers holding on to their toys and not wanting to share. That's the way that the Israelites lived. And if you weren't an Israelite, you couldn't go into the temple. You could go into the outer court, but you couldn't go any closer. They would literally kill you for going any closer if you weren't an Israelite. They didn't want to share it. If you look through the Old Testament, God never said that you're my chosen people, you only, what we say, he said, you're my chosen people, I want you to go out into the ends of the earth. Like there's multiple times we talked about them being the priests. Them being the priests are like we see in the New Testament. So with the scripture, there's a couple things I want us to know. And that is, when we look at it, that's the way he chose to come. He chose to come down as a baby, as a fragile infant, as someone who would need others to take care of him. He came to a carpenter and a 15-year-old, basically. I mean, he could have came as a prince, right? I mean, let's be honest. If I can tell you, if you can come back as anybody you want, you're thinking, well, how old is Bill Gates? Is he going to have another kid? Or, Steve Jobs, is he having, maybe I can come back as an inherited millionaire. Because I don't want to work. Maybe a billionaire. Let's be honest. Maybe you can come back as a Saudi prince who just has oil money coming in and you just buy extravagant cars, and when they die, you're just like, I'll buy a new one. It's no big deal. We would pick to come with money and power and fame. Jesus chooses a carpenter and a 15-year-old girl and says, yeah, this is the people I want to be with. He comes from Nazareth. And I love, in the Bible, they literally say, can anything good come from Nazareth? You ever seen some of the old westerns? Nothing good comes from Missouri. I think of that every time I read that. And I think that's Josie Wales, if I remember correctly. But nothing good comes from Nazareth. And that's where he comes from. He could have chose to come from, born in the middle of Jerusalem, the son of a king, or he could have been anyone, but he's like, no, this is who I want. And it's because he wanted to come, and he didn't want to be high above. He didn't want to be separate. He had done that. He had been that. He still is that. He's still high above. He's still separate. He's still holy. He's still righteous. But he wanted to live among his people. His people weren't just the Israelites. They weren't just this small group, but he traveled. He went to different nations and different countries. I don't want to walk to Arkansas, and it's not that far. He was willing to travel to other countries all by foot. But we see that he came that way, and he was raised that way. And then as you look through the rest of the New Testament, you see where he lived and where he acted. He was a servant. He wasn't a king. I don't know about you, but I've seen nowhere else in the Bible and historical books where a king washes one of his subjects' feet. Unheard of. Unheard of. He didn't choose to be wealthy. He came to be a normal person like us. I'm sure Mary and Joseph had struggles with money. He was a carpenter. They had to move several times. I imagine, like us, if you're a small business, you're a local business, you know what you normally want to keep? The people that come back, repeat customers, right? That's the thing. They keep coming back. So if you move from country to somewhere else, you're a foreigner, you're making furniture of some sort, or maybe it's carpenter. That's pretty much furniture. They didn't build houses out of wood or anything then. So this is what he does. He moves to another country. No one knows him. How does he get customers? How does he make money? He didn't come as a wealthy person. He came as someone that had to live and had to struggle and had to fight through it. And that's what he chose because he wanted to understand our hurts, our struggles, our pains, and he saw them. I don't think any of us have ever seen someone die the gruesome death that he died on the cross, the way that he was beaten before that. I hope that none of us ever have to see that. But there's times when he's experienced stuff that we'll never know. And when we experience hard things in life, things that we think, how do I get through this? He's there for us. He said he's not distant. He's not far away. He didn't want to come as a king. He wanted to come as a fellow man with us. He's someone that lived how we live, loved how we love. It was just a part of the day-to-day life. He chose to come down that way. He could have chosen any way. I guarantee you, if we were all totally honest, and we could say we could come any way, and our parents still be good parents, blah, 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 all the things that you'd say to make sure that you didn't offend anyone, you would pick come back wealthy. Just be real. You'd come wealthy if you could. He didn't choose that. The other thing that I want us to see is Shekinah. It's actually referenced here if you look at the original language. I had to check about 3 or 4 different times to make sure I spelled Shekinah right, and I found that there's actually 3 or 4 different spellings for the word Shekinah, depending on what time period it's in. So if you're not familiar with the word, it means the glory of the divine presence. It's dwelling. It's living. We normally hear this word. Have you ever heard the phrase Shekinah glory? That's later. That's usually talking about the Spirit's presence with us. In scholarly terms, it would be his manifest presence. That's his physical presence in this place. It's not just his presence all across the earth like it is, but then his manifest presence is when it's physically there with you, and you can just feel it, the thickness. That's the Shekinah glory. The reason that it's referenced here is because the glory of the divine presence is when Jesus came down and was born, and when the Spirit came into Mary, and she was pregnant. The glory of the divine presence was in her. It wasn't the glory of your presence or Joseph's presence or anyone else's presence. It was the glory of the divine presence, which only can be God. So when that word is used, it's a statement of power and authority and direction of where it comes from. So the glory of his divine presence was right there with him, with her. So anytime when Jesus would walk, he's physically in their presence, right? He's God walking in their midst. When he was a baby, I kind of wondered how old Jesus was when he started to talk, right? I mean, and let's be honest, he could probably talk as a baby if he wanted to. I'm like, how does this happen? When does he get to that age? Because there's one of the other Bible stories that says, he's a child and he's teaching in the temple, because just the why are you his parents are looking for him, they can't find him, they finally do. He says, well, why are you looking for me? Did you not know I'd be in my Father's house? Isn't this an obvious of where I would be? His presence was literally with them. It was walking among them. It was there. And that's what he chose. Because he didn't want to be the distant God. The way he came pointed to coming this specific way. In this place. I mean, there's times when he was with thousands of people. He was tortured. He was chased. They wanted to persecute him. It says in John, they wanted to kill him every time he spoke, basically. They'd be I'm ready to murder you. And it's not my time yet. And he would disappear somehow. He would go into the mountains to be alone because people were following him so much that he couldn't get away. His presence is what we should desire. His presence is what we should chase after. Instead of it being after this part or that part or this lost piece that I think we focus on so much, but his presence is what draws people. His presence is what people chase. It's what they pursue. It was his presence that healed. Most of the time he went. Most of the time he spoke. He touched. He touched his garment. It was his presence. There's only a few stories where he did not go. He was not physically present and there were people healed. But his presence was still there because those people had so much faith. He said, I've not seen faith like this anywhere else. The centurion comes to him, my servant's sick. And he's like, no, you're not. My house is not worthy for you to come to. You just say it, and it'll happen. Because I know when I tell people to do something, they get it done. That's paraphrased. But that person's healed. But the glory of his presence can be physical, like it was when he was here, or it can be physical in spirit where we don't even see it. But you can feel it. If you've had those moments where you just kind of to feel the presence of him, that's the Shekinah presence. That's the presence that we should pursue. It's the presence that when he came, that's the presence he came to bring. Because before he came, how many people got to go before God? The high priest. Only one person a year could go before God on one day. And if they weren't right with God, sometimes they would die. And they would drag them out with a rope around their ankle because they couldn't go in there either, or they would die. So it was a very, very different time. I mean, you read through, if you look through the Old Testament, they touched the Ark of the Covenant. That's where the commandments were. That's where his presence was. If they just touch it, trying to keep it from falling, people would die. Because they couldn't handle his presence. They couldn't handle his spirit there because of his righteousness. But when Jesus came, that presence was no longer available only to the few. It was no longer available to just the priests, to just the leaders. it was then available to everyone who believed. Because it's not a presence that I can say only pastors get this presence. No. Kids get this presence. Kids probably get the presence more than pastors do. Like, let's be real. Kids, like you were telling a story, kids have more faith than most Christians do. I mean, I remember, dude, I don't know, I can tell you time after time when a kid's like, oh, this is what we should do. And somewhere along the way, we kind of get jaded as we get older. I've talked about that in a few different ways, but we kind of like, no, this won't happen. But his presence, through his presence that is here and can manifest with us, with his Spirit that came after he came here as a man and then ascended into heaven, his presence was made available to everyone. So it was setting this up. Because if he didn't come the way he did, if he didn't come during that time period, if he didn't come at all, we would never have his presence with us today. Our messiness does not deter Jesus. He's not concerned about our messes, our pains, our struggles, our doubts. None of those are things where Jesus is like, oh, I can't do it. He doesn't have a checklist. If you ever go to the doctor and say you're going to get like a surgery or something, like I went to the doctor this week and I was thinking about LASIK surgeries. It's like I'd love to like wake up and be like, everything's clear. I don't have to worry about anything. Because I actually don't like wearing contacts. I work on a computer, drive my eyes out, and I hate it. So I went to the doctor to see about that. And so they have to evaluate you to see if you're eligible for it. Well, are you a good candidate? And they go through the steps. But Jesus doesn't do that with us. He's not like, are you a good candidate to be a Christian? Well, I see here that, you only had this. Okay, that's fine. That's acceptable. There's some risk because, obviously you're going to put a laser in your eye. He's not like, no, this one's okay, but the rest of it, no, sorry. There's no eligibility list. There's no exceptions. There's no, okay, well, this can happen. It's not like only this can happen in this way, or for this, or you might get this. But our messiness doesn't deter him. It doesn't bother him. He came to be with us in our mess. He chose to be with us in our mess. And he came to bring us salvation. It wasn't to bring, the cute little baby pictures. It wasn't to, all the things that we think of, sweet little baby Jesus. It's none of those things, but he came to bring us salvation. And the only way we would receive salvation is by him coming. They only come through that way. They only happen that way. They only are affected that way. So if we look at it and we can only see that we're a mess, we think, because most of us have the idea that there's some eligibility list with God, that he doesn't come to us. He's not going to bring us salvation or hope or love or any of those things. He won't love us. He won't forgive us because we're this. We've messed up on this. Or I've asked him to forgive me for this for 4 times, and that's too many. No. He's not deterred by it. He's not stopped by it. He's not held back by it. It's not something that distracts him or bothers him or anything like that. He accepts it. He accepts you, no matter where the mess is, no matter where the struggle is, no matter what any of this is. And I think during holiday season is when we see this the most. We think that we have to be joyful. We have to accept his joy. We have to accept the happiness. We have to be happy and put on a fake face all the time. Let's be honest. We feel that way. Especially if you work in retail or something, you're like, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. Sometime after you've said it 98 times that day, you don't feel like saying it anymore. It doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel real because it's not. It's just words. I have family, I have friends who get very upset when people say happy holidays. Or they say something like that, and it's like, well, they could just not say anything and just be like, bye, hi, how are you? Why are you talking to me? I mean, let's be real. There's so many things we could do, but it's like, at the end of the day, the words that we say are just words if we don't mean them. And I'm willing to say most of the time we say Merry Christmas to someone, we're not thinking, I hope you have the most joyous Christmas holiday ever. We're saying 2 words because this is what people say during this time of year. You see it on social media. Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas. It's a new year. We're going to set goals, and it's, Happy Easter, Happy Hanukkah, or whatever it is. We just say these things as words. But when we can look at it and we can just say, You don't have to be fake joyfulness when you're not happy. It doesn't make you a better Christian to be really happy during Christmas time when you feel like everything's falling apart. Jesus isn't like, well, you're not happy that they're talking about baby Jesus, you're excluded. We don't have to. You don't have to fake joyfulness when you feel like there's a mess. You don't have to worry about what others think and the struggle here and looking at it from there. But we can look at it and say, this is what's going on in my life. Will you pray for me? Will you remember me? But we think that this time of the year, we just put so much pressure on ourselves to meet the expectation of acting this way or talking this way. And I want to give you permission to not force yourself to do that. I want to challenge you to not force yourself to do that. I personally have never been much of a person to, say greetings like that. I also will not listen to Christmas music 2 months. If it's in my car, it will not be on Christmas music. Pretty much any time unless Kristen drove it last. She will listen to Christmas music the day they start playing. But I don't want to listen to Christmas music for 2 months. It doesn't make me happy. And here's the other thing that's really a terrible thing to even say sometimes to some people. They think, oh, it's so offensive. There's just a lot of the things that we do in the holidays that some people make specific people happy, but it doesn't make everyone else happy. So you don't have to be forced to be happy because of this. That doesn't mean to go out and be rude. That doesn't mean go out and do this. But when Jesus came to be with us in our mess and in our life and walk among us, it wasn't to make us fake happiness everywhere all the time. Especially during Christmas. If you're not happy the rest of the time, you don't have to be happy this time. You can pray about what's going on. You can struggle through it. You can mull through it. You can chew on it. But we don't have to think it. That's not why Jesus came. He came with us to be in our mess, to redeem us, to save us, to revive us from that. But if we don't have that revival, that redemption that's changed us from the inside, changes us to the outside, even when we do have that, we still have bad days. I know I get grouchy sometimes, and there's only one person in this room that usually gets the blunt of that, and she's over there. I know I get grouchy. I know I don't like change. I don't like when things don't happen the exact way I wanted them to. I don't like when my plans change. I don't like when things aren't in the right place, even if it seems like it makes no sense to anyone else. This is where I left it. This is where it should be. If you go in my shop, you'll be like, I can't find anything. Yeah, it's over here. I know where it is. But Jesus came to us in our mess. He chose to. He wanted us to. And honestly, you will never overcome that mess as long as you're faking it. Because no one knows what's going on. Most people, your real friends, your real family, they care. They're like, hey, I'm sorry you're going through it. Can I help? How can I help? But you never get that help if you're like, everything's great. Everything's fantastic. When Jesus came down, he came to bring us salvation. He came to bring us hope. And he came to bring us peace. He's the Prince of Peace. If you don't have peace, that's what he wants to bring. He's literally bringing that to us. If we're struggling, we feel like we're alone. His name literally means God with us. He's with us. He's walking with us. His power is within us. His power is available to us. He's here. And I think this is where we struggle a lot of times. This is John 2:25. No one needed to tell him about our human nature. No one needed to tell him, for he knew what was in each person's heart. We think that I'm a terrible person, he doesn't know this about me, or I can hide this, I can put this away in my secret place. He knows. He knows what's in each person's heart. I think sometimes, if you're like me, sometimes you're praying, you're just like, I don't get this person, they got this going on, you're kind of going through your head, you're thinking about it, praying about it. We don't have to tell him about human nature. We don't have to tell him about struggling. We don't have to tell him about fear. The Bible says, do not fear 365 times for a reason, because he knows we're going to struggle with fear. We're going to struggle with doubts. We're going to struggle with issues. But when he came, no one needed to tell him about our human nature. No one needed to tell him, be careful because humans can do this, or they'll tell you one thing, but they mean another. No one had to tell him. He knew each person's heart. And you know what's interesting? He still knows each person's heart. If you think wickedly things, he knows it. If you think really good things, he knows it. If you really hope people have a Merry Christmas, he knows it. If you hope people would stop saying that to you, he knows it. There's no secret that we're hiding from Him. So why do we try to hide it from each other? Because I believe that God's opinion of me matters more than man's opinion of me. That may be hard. It's like, well, what if they don't like me? I had a conversation this morning with someone who had that conversation this morning with someone else. People tell me that they don't like them. I think we've all had that conversation. You know what? That conversation hurts too. Especially when you think it's someone that should. But we don't have to tell Jesus about the way people treat us. We don't have to tell Jesus about the way we treat other people. You don't have to pray to Jesus and be like, God, I did this. He knows. He knows our hearts. When He came, He chose the mess. He chose the pain. He chose the suffering because He knew it's what would give us peace. It's what would give us salvation. It's what would give us hope. It's what would help us love others. It wasn't so we can stand back and say, everything's great when things aren't. It wasn't so we can look at it and be like, well, this Christian person is everything perfect. I promise you they don't. No matter who they are, no matter what they are, no matter how successful or unsuccessful someone is, we all struggle. And I think we can look at other people and say, well, their life is perfect. But it's not. I ask if everyone will just stand with me. We're gonna wrap it up here, and we're all going to eat here shortly. But what I want us to look at, what I want you guys to really sit back and say, I want you to examine your own hearts. Jesus knows what's in your heart, but do you? Do you know what's in there? Do you know what you're really fearing, what you're struggling with, what peace that you need? Do you know that? Let's get everyone to close their eyes, no one looking around. If you are struggling with fears, with doubts of things that are going on right now this holiday season, things that you feel like you have to put on a show, I ask that you raise your hand so I can pray for you. This is a time that you can say, I am dealing with this publicly. And no matter, I won't come to you, I won't point it out, but I can pray for you and pray that God will help you, give you peace. That God will give you the salvation, the strength that you need. If you need that, I ask that you raise your hand, I'll pray for you. See that hand? See that hand? Is anyone else struggling? It's so hard because it feels like everyone else is so happy right now to admit that we're struggling with maybe it's pain. Maybe it's this going on. We feel like nothing's going right in our life. But I want to pray for you. So I'm going to give you give another chance here. If you need me to pray for you, I want you to raise your hand and I'll pray for you. See that hand? Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father God, you know what is in each of our hearts right now. Those that raise their hands, God, you know what they need. You know if they need peace, send them peace. Just let it flow over them like water. Just let them feel it. The Shekinah presence of your glory on them if they need peace. If they are suffering with pains, if they're suffering with struggles, God, let your presence just be on them and overcome those, God. Heal their hearts, heal their minds, heal their bodies, God. Whatever they need, God, just pour out your presence on them and just let them know, just let them feel you just wrap your arms around them, God. For those that did not raise their hand, God, you know what's in each of their hearts. If they're thinking, well, I kind of do, but I kind of don't, God, give them peace. Pour out your Spirit on each of us here, God. Let us feel your presence and the peace that it brings, and the salvation that it brings, and the hope that it brings, God. Let us not have the fake joy or fake happiness, but let us know that even in the mess, you still love us. Even in the pain, the struggles, the day-to-day life as humans, you still love us. God, you know what each of us need, and I ask that you supply that need for us, God. Be with us as we go through this week, God. Be with us as we go through the day. And let us be a hope and a good witness of you to those that are around us. Let us share your love with those that need you the most. In Jesus' name I pray.